Welcome to another in this series of conversations with 1970s era Grebel alumni. Today we're reconnecting with Marieke Meyer, whose name I've become used to hearing in the credits at the end of certain CBC programs. Welcome, Marieke.
Thank you. Hi, welcome. Nice to be here, Larry. Thanks.
Could you begin this conversation by telling us about your connection to Grebel? In the early 1970s, you could have gone anywhere to school, and I'm interested in why you chose Waterloo and why Grebel.
Well, I grew up in the Ottawa Mennonite Church and then had gone to Fraser Lake Camp for several years as a camper and then a counselor. And I definitely wanted to go to university. And a whole bunch of my friends were going to Grebel, and I figured it would be just kind of like camp with classes. And and I was also I was a couple of years ahead. This is in the days of grade 13, but when I came to Grebel, I had just turned 17. So I think my parents felt good about me going to a place that was going to be have a little more nurturing, I'll say.
So what grade did you skip along the way, or how did you get that advanced?
Oh, I skipped a grade in public school, did grade 3, and then skipped grade 10. So I was very young, and yes, and when I think back on my Grable years, I wince a little because I was very young.
Hmm. How long were you in residence, and
I
what
was
were
only
the?
in residence for
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was only in residence for 1 year. I went to some of my one of my closest friends is Janice Funk, who is Janice Dreger, and her husband Jim Funk, and I got to know them, of course, very, very well, and we're still in touch. And I also, from camp days, Marie and Bob Burkholder were very good friends, and because Grable is such an intimate and, as I said, nurturing community, it's just it's just a wonderful place to land right out of high school. I can't imagine if I would have gone to, I don't know, U of T or somewhere fine university, but I think I would have been at sea. I would have been lost. And so just going to chapel and having community dinners once a week and taking a course, at least one course. So I only lived in residence for a year, but then I took courses for the rest of my time there.
Right. What were some of your most memorable moments, or people, or encounters during your Grable years?
Well, I would say that honestly, for me, it was the people. Um, I remember speaking at chapel one time, and just, I mean, it's partly the age. You just fall in love with people your own age. And I remember speaking at chapel and reading a quote from Joan Baez, where she said, "Would it embarrass you terribly if I told you that I loved you?" And I remember saying that and my eyes just streaming with tears, and because I just thought, I just love this place, and I just love these people. And definitely, I think that for me, the Mennonite tradition, and I had, just by the way, I don't have what we'll call a traditional Mennonite last name because I had immigrated as a child from the Netherlands, and my family grew up in the Singelkerk in Amsterdam, and we're from a long, long line of Mennonites, but who had always stayed in Holland. So that's sort of my multi-generational connection through my mother. But
Wow, I've always wondered about that.
yeah.
Then, if I follow your LinkedIn page correctly, you headed off then after your English degree to Carleton's journalism school back in Ottawa. Why that choice?
Well, not I grew up in Ottawa, but it wasn't. I had a little bit of a detour along the way. Moved to Vancouver for a couple of years just to live somewhere else and to see another part of the country. And I worked for an insurance company, filing, and realized that I really didn't have a career in insurance when I was asked what would be the best sort of way to convince people that they should buy insurance if they lived in an earthquake zone. And it was just the oddest question. And I just thought, no, this isn't for me. So then I thought, well, maybe I could work in library. And then actually I had an interview with somebody who said, you have a nice voice. Have you ever thought of working in radio? And I hadn't at all. I wasn't a family that grew up with CBC radio. We listened to, it wasn't until I lived in Vancouver that I started listening to CBC radio, but I never really at that point thought that I would live there. But after a couple of years in Vancouver, moved back home to Ottawa, and then I don't know, that I guess niggled in my mind a little bit, and I thought I would apply to be a volunteer at the student radio station there, even though I wasn't a student at the time. And I worked for a couple of years there, became the director of student affairs, which was nothing to do of public affairs, which had nothing to do with affairs, but had more to do with public interest. And then actually after working there, I decided to go back and get a degree in journalism. I already had a degree in English, and it was a intensive 1-year program that gave me a degree in journalism too. And then after that, at this point, I was attached and almost married, and we decided to move to Toronto. And then I started. It was a dream of mine to work at the CBC, and I just kind of got in touch with them, and it was a little bit easier then, I have to say, to just be able to, but I started by, I worked as a radio producer for 32 years. That's what I started with, and that's what I ended with. I always worked in radio. And I think the thing that attracted me to radio in particular is that it's all about stories. It's all about telling stories. And I think that that is what makes us most human, is that we have the ability to tell stories. We all know that we learn things best through stories, that we experience things through stories, and that we all, I think that must go back to way back when we all would sit around a campfire, whether it was at camp or way back in our distant past, and somebody would tell a story. And that's what I've had the chance to do for 32 years. So I started working for the morning show, just kind of fill in shifts here and there, and the afternoon show locally. And then as life goes on, I had a baby, and then had another baby, and then I was asked to apply for a job at Morningside to work as the studio director, which meant starting very, very early in the morning. That was with Peter Zosky. And it fit my schedule, and it was just a chance to, to work on a program that I felt had a great deal of integrity, and told the stories of Canadians. And that's what I loved about it the most.
Wow. Morningside, that's a landmark, and Zosky.
Yeah.
What were some of your other favorite shows? You moved on from Morningside to?
Yeah, I worked at Morningside for 7 years, and then I worked at This Morning, which was what followed it, with Michael Enright, for a couple of years. And then I worked on Tapestry. I produced Tapestry, which is the kind of religious / spiritual program on Sunday afternoons on CBC. And I produced that for 5 years. And that was, I would say, for me, just an incredible highlight. I mean, I've always had a real spiritual thirst and desire to explore that part of what it means to be human in many ways. And there I got to do it. I remember talking to, for example, the Jungian analyst Marion Woodman, who's really influential in psychiatric circles. And she said, in life, you can have a choice to really consider who you are and why you're here, or you can be a happy carrot. And I always liked the idea of being a happy carrot, but it's just not in it. It's just not in me to just settle for being a happy carrot. And but I just, it truly was there. It felt like such an amazing privilege to work there. One of the people that I remember meeting was John Shelby Spong, who was the Episcopalian Bishop of Newark, and him saying that we can no more understand the nature of God than imagine if or understand what it means to be in God's image. If horses were to have a God, you can be sure that God would look like a horse, because that's what they understand. So that's why we always present God as being, well, usually a man, and certainly human. And but that's just so limiting to think that's what God is. When God says I've created you in my image, if we don't really know what that image is, then we just assume that means like a human being. And chances are that God is far more infinite than that. So I thought that was really interesting. I remember talking to Harold Kushner, who wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And as he talked about the 23rd Psalm, and as he said, part of that, it's of course a great comfort to people. That Psalm, it's probably the most familiar Psalm to even people that aren't familiar with the Bible. And as he said, God doesn't promise us that bad things and difficult things won't happen. He doesn't say, I will, you never have to go through the valley of the shadow. And instead, God says, I will be with you. So yes, you'll experience hard things, but I'll be right there with you. And then I'm trying to remember, I do have a note here, but yes, Dov Marmer, who is the Rabbi Emeritus of Holy Blossom Temple, he said that, if you really want to feel loved by God and truly feel the love of God, you first have to love yourself. And that really refutes a lot of the what I would say traditional teachings of the church, which is that you are not worthy. You're not worthy to eat the crumbs. You're not worthy. I mean, I guess what I would say is that I've really learned to embrace the spiritual stance that we are worthy. We are worthy of being loved. And that's what, once we understand that, and that life has so many wonderful possibilities, it just seems to me so much more expansive, such a much more expansive way to live. So that was just, those were 5 really wonderful years for me. And then after that, I was asked to produce an archival program, because CBC Radio has been around for so long that there's just, as you can imagine, a wealth of information. And so I just kind of had to create it out of nothing, just completely by myself. So I asked my friend Michael Enright to be the host, and he did. And I actually produced that for 7 years, and it was every week, and it was so much fun to listen to all the old voices, some familiar, some much older, to just hear how people's way of speaking has changed every decade. You could almost, I mean, people used to speak on the air with this very formal kind of mid-Atlantic accent, where they would impart the information to you, and you were definitely the one learning things, and I'm the one teaching you. And now it's much more, we think of it as a conversation, but throughout it all, it's still always about telling stories. And that's, for me, what has made my whole career absolutely wonderful. And now that I'm no, I retired from CBC. I had a chance to have an early retirement. So now I'm writing, actually, my mom, who passed away almost 3 years ago, but I'm writing a series of essays about her, which I'm hoping will be a book. And it's kind of based on pieces of her clothing, but just kind of peripherally related, and what they say about her. So it's all about stories too. So that's what I am, that's what I would say I was one of the things that I don't know if I can honestly say I took that from my Grebel experience or if it was always part of my growing up experience. I had a grandmother who loved to tell stories, and she'd always say, you know, I have a magic thumb and there's stories in there, and I'm going to pull a story out. And then she would tell us a story of something. So, you know, so I think I probably got it from there too. But certainly I honestly think that the thing that I treasure the most about Grebel and my years at Grebel, and I honestly have nothing but affection for Grebel, is um, how completely accepted I felt there. How I didn't feel like, I don't know, it was okay to question beliefs. You weren't told to have a certain way of thinking. Um, I remember thinking, and it embarrasses me to say this, but I just tell myself I was only 17, that Grable would have been perfect if I wouldn't have actually had to go to classes, you know, because it was so great to sit around and talk to people and share stuff and share stories and all of that. And all this pesky studying got in the way. But I mean, that's, you know, I understand the sentiment behind that, even if I mean, I imagine students are a little more studious now, but yeah.
It's a more competitive environment, I think, to even get
Yes.
in now, right, than it was during our days. Just back before we wrap up, just back on Tapestry and Rewind. I always loved Tapestry for the reasons you mentioned.
Mhm.
And I enjoyed Rewind thoroughly because it was like a time machine, right? You
Yeah,
go straight back and you'd hear the voices of reporters from long ago and
that's right.
commentators. It was wonderful.
Oh,
Uh,
thanks. I loved doing it too. I loved producing it. And I just thought that in many ways, Michael Enright was the perfect host because he could always add a couple of stories of his own, you know, either things that he remembered or that um, you know, he would tell me many fun off-air stories as well, which I won't necessarily share, but, you know, sort of like, oh, I remember that guy, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. You've already dealt with the big questions here about how your connection to Grable played out in your career
Mhm.
and how it influenced your thinking and producing in some ways.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add about that as you recall those years between high school and your English degree and what role Grable played in all of that?
I think that I've kind of probably covered it. I think that I mean, I sometimes look at people who are going there and deciding to go there now, and I just think, oh, you're really lucky, you know. I mean, honestly, I you hear so many stories about, and of course, because there's no grade 13 in Ontario anymore, there that most people are that much younger, and it's just to be thrust in the world of university without supports, really, it just seems so daunting. And I just think, oh, you're lucky to go to a place where you're going to be challenged and supported at the same time, which is what we all need, right? We need both of those things, are when we're young and as we get older. So that's what I would say is anybody who goes to Grable is lucky to be there.
You're so right. It's been a wonderful conversation, Marika. Thanks so much for taking part.
Oh, I enjoyed it thoroughly. Then it was lovely to see you too, Larry, and I look forward to catching up with people perhaps at the reunion. That'll be fun. I'm planning to be there.